Cardi, thank you very much for setting this up. That's Cardi Vahan at Climate Kick. My name's Hudson Worsley, Chair of MECLA. I'm joining you from Gadigal country and pay respects to elders past and present, recognising that we can all learn so much from being good ancestors and Indigenous knowledge, how that can be transferred to our world of sustainability. I'd like to remind everybody that MECLA operates in a pre-competitive space. It's all about collaboration and sharing ideas, but not prices and contracts. I think we know that, but always say that just to keep us just on the right side of the line, to avoid any anti-competitive behaviour or conflicts of interest. If you think you have a conflict, that's okay. We all wear different hats at different times, but please exclude yourself from the session and we can deal with it after that. Lots going on with MECLA. Before we get started today, I'd just like to mention Melbourne Build is coming up in late November, 25th to 26th. We've got a good arrangement, an agreement with Melbourne Build to nominate MECLA members who may want to be panellists across that program. So have a look at the program online, see if any topics spring out to you and say, yep, that's my area of expertise, I'd like to contribute. Get in touch with us, the Secretariat, to help move that along. We have a MECLA panel discussion in that program already, design to delivery, making low carbon projects work in practice, which aligns with our do tank method of operating. So that's exciting. Our next show and tell after this one will be on the 3rd of September, 1 o'clock, the hidden asset, rooftop and airspace developments for modern methods of construction with Western Sydney University. So also another really interesting topic. But today we've got two wonderful speakers. Nicole Garofano has long been a friend of MECLA and many of the people involved. G'day, Nicole. Thank you for joining us. And her colleague, Darren, also from Monash University. Darren Sharp, g'day. Thank you for your time today. I'll shortly hand over to you. These people are from the Sustainability Transition Lab at Monash Business School. Today presenting to us, but also hearing from us. So it'll be presentation followed by an interactive session talking about the Australian Government program supporting the National Circular Economy Framework. So, as always, let's listen. Let's store our ideas. The Q&A function will be there for people to pop their questions in. If you're halfway through a sandwich, by all means, keep the camera off. If you've got a clean mouth and you'd like to be seen and sharing the information, by all means, turn your camera back on. But yeah, let's keep it informal, but I look forward to the Q&A at the end. But Dr. Nicole Garofano, can I hand over to you now, please?
Thank you, Hudson. And yes, it is a great privilege to join you this afternoon. I can see some familiar faces on the screen, so it's lovely to see some of you again. I'm actually going to hand over to Darren, who is going to introduce the first section of this presentation, and I'll come back to you with some findings of the research that we've done to date and start with some interaction. So I'll pass over to you, Darren, to introduce the whole project to the team. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. It's great to be with you all today. Thanks so much for that warm welcome. Yeah, so I'm Darren Sharp. I'm co-director of the Sustainability Transitions Lab at Monash Business School. I was formerly at Monash Sustainable Development Institute, and I'm also a senior research fellow leading project coordination for this wonderful project that we've been working on over this past year or so. It's called Practical Support for Business Circular Economy Transitions. It's part of the Sustainable Communities and Waste Hub. And in terms of our wonderful team, obviously you just met Nicole. I want to give a shout out to our colleagues from the Sustainability Transitions Lab, Stefan Kaufman and Martin Geisdorfer, who can't be with us today, but we're going to be sharing insights from some of their work today as well. In terms of getting started, I also want to just acknowledge the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, on whose land I'm joining from today here in sunny Melbourne. For now, it's sunny. It's been a bit up and down, but it's a nice day today. And I want to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. In terms of the agenda, there's going to be a bit of talking from us. And then we want to hear from you, especially. So we want this to be quite interactive. I'm going to spend a few minutes on the project introduction, and then go through some insights that emerge from Martin's work on the circular economy tool scan that he's been leading. Then I'll hand over to Nicole to share some findings from a number of interviews, sector interviews she's been doing around the country, and a survey results that we can share as well. And we will have a QR code towards the end with an open invitation to participate in that survey, which remains open. Then we'll move to the more of the fun, interactive part of the proceedings today, where we're going to have a bit of a workshop/discussion to really hear from you. We're keen to understand your needs. Nicole and I are going to facilitate that, and then we'll talk a bit about next steps over the coming months. So just to kick things off, in terms of the background, really, this project aims to identify practical support to assist businesses with the circular economy transition. As I mentioned, it sits within the Sustainable Communities and Waste Hub, which is under the National Environmental Science Program, funded by DQ. And really, this particular project emerged from discussions about how research can better support implementation of the National Circular Economy Framework, which I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. So while the framework provides a compelling national vision and ambition, there's definitely, as many of us would know, an implementation gap. And so what we're trying to do through our research and through this project is to address the important question about what the circular economy transition looks like for businesses on the ground, with a particular focus on SMEs, which make up most of the Australian economy and doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of practical work on the ground, but have less time and fewer resources to engage with new frameworks and initiatives. Understand we probably don't have a lot of SMEs today, but they may be part of your supply chain, and you have strong networks into that SME sector. So we're keen to kind of understand how we can reach out to some of those organisations as well. And the real purpose of this project is to understand the practical next steps that businesses can take across the 4 priority sectors, and to understand the barriers and support needs for navigating the transition. So I'm sure that many of you will be familiar with the broader case for the circular economy, so don't want to spend a whole lot of time dwelling on that. But what makes the circular economy so compelling is that it addresses multiple challenges at the same time. It offers opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, resource consumption and waste, while importantly also creating new opportunities for business value creation, economic growth, and jobs. So while we see that the system level benefits are increasingly well understood, the more interesting question for us at least is, what does this actually look like in practice for businesses? And how do organisations move from understanding the vision to taking meaningful action? So just to briefly recap, you might be familiar with this coming out of the National Circular Economy Framework from a couple of years ago, which has a goal to double the circularity of the economy by 2035. And it's built around 3 core principles. So pollution. The second is about keeping products and materials in use for as long as possible. And the third is regenerating natural systems rather than degrading them. And so the framework focuses on 4 key sectors: industry, built environment, which we're pleased to focus on today, and keen to hear your thoughts, food and agriculture, and of course resources as well. And so the framework sets ambitious targets around resource productivity, resource recovery, and doubling Australia's circularity over time. And the key question for us is what implementation of those ambitions actually looks like in practice. So what are we doing in this project? The work we're presenting today is based on listening to businesses and their supporters over the 4 priority sectors over the last few months, and that work's feeding into today, the work that's happened over March to June and July, and then today we've also undertaken a scan of circular economy tools and frameworks, which we'll talk about briefly shortly. And Nicole's going to share insights that are emerging from the interviews that she's conducted and the survey. And we've engaged with businesses, industry bodies, and other stakeholders around the country. So today's part of extending that process and that invitation to dialogue with us. We're sharing early findings. We're testing those insights with you and others around the country. The next phase is going to focus on turning those insights into practical outputs, resources, templates, and we're developing a searchable library of tools that businesses can use. But we want to make sure that that is fit for purpose and can meet all of your needs. And then we're also looking at where policy, procurement, funding, and coordination could better support business action on the ground. So next, I want to give you a brief overview of the tool scan work that our colleague Martin Geisdorfer and his team have been leading. And the goal of this aspect of the work is to understand what tools are already available, where they fit, how businesses might make better use of them. So one thing that we've observed is that although there's growing interest in circular economy, many businesses are still asking very practical questions, such as, where do I start? Which tools are relevant for my organization? How do I move beyond ideas and into implementation? And this review is intended to help answer those questions. And of course, we recognize that transitioning to a circular economy is hard. One thing acknowledged consistently across the literature and in our discussions with businesses these last few months is that the transition to circular economy is very challenging. At a global level, organizations face issues such as commercial risk, capability gaps, regulatory barriers, lack of common language, and different market conditions. And of course, Australia, we face, some additional challenges as well. We're hearing about limited established markets, uncertainty about where to begin, infrastructure gaps, shortages of skills and leadership capability, fragmented supply chains, and of course, uncertainty around investment decisions too. A particularly important issue is what some people describe as the valley of death, where promising circular initiatives reach pilot stage, but then struggle to scale and become embedded in normal everyday business practices. So understanding how we help organizations move beyond pilots and to scale them into mainstream adoption is a key area of interest for us. So tools and frameworks can obviously help organizations navigate some of these challenges. And the issue, of course, isn't a lack of tools. In fact, there are a great many tools available. The challenge is that many were developed for specific contexts. Many have only been tested at relatively small scales. It can be very difficult for organizations to know which ones are appropriate for their circumstances. And what we're finding is that better curation and better organization of these resources is just as important as developing new tools. So businesses need help finding the right tool for the right purpose at the right stage of their transition. And Martin's been conducting a systemic literature review, and that has both practical and a research purpose. Practically, we want to help bridge the gap between knowledge and action by making the circular economy tools easier to find and apply. And then from a research perspective, we're interested in understanding the kinds of tools that exist, where there are gaps and how useful these tools are in practice. A key question is whether the tools being developed by researchers and consultants and practitioners are actually meeting the needs of businesses. And we're aiming to publish this work in the leading scientific journal at the conclusion of the data collection. And this is something that we're going to keep exploring throughout the project as well. So to date, we've reviewed over 470 documents, identified around 100 relevant tools, and that number is continuing to grow. What's most interesting isn't necessarily the volume of the tools. The value comes from understanding how these tools can be organized and applied to different business needs. So most organizations aren't looking for a long list of resources. They're looking for practical support that helps them solve a particular problem, to make a decision or take the next steps. And that's where this work becomes useful. So one outcome of the review has been the development of 6 broad categories of tools, which you probably will find of interest. These are strategy and ideation, measurement and assessment, implementation and operational tools, monitoring and reporting, partnering and market making, governance and market shaping tools. So The first four align closely with the typical plan, do, check, review kind of cycle. And the final two become increasingly important as businesses and organizations mature, begin to think about scaling action, about developing capability, and about how you influence broader systems. So these categories will ultimately form the foundation of a searchable tool library that we're developing, which will allow businesses to identify tools that match both their needs and their stage of maturity as well. So I hope that's given you a sort of quick overview, but an interesting overview from your perspective about the project and what we're trying to achieve. Now I'm going to hand over to Nicole, who'll share what she's been hearing directly from businesses about their needs, challenges, and priorities from the interviews that she's been conducting and from the survey. So I'll hand over to you now, Nicole.
Thanks, Darren. That was a great whistle-stop tour of the research we've been doing so far. And just before I get into some points and thoughts that I was having while you were speaking there, I forgot to introduce myself. So I'm Nicole Garofano, for those who don't know me. I'm working on this project as a contractor to Monash, the Sustainability Transitions Labs at Monash Business School. But some of you may be familiar with me from my days at Planet Arc, leading the Australian Circular Economy Hub. So since my completion of that role last year, my role was made redundant. I have been able to transition into doing some really quite exciting work, and including this project. So it's been a delight to be with you today. I just wanted to add a few points as well to what Darren was saying, that major systems change is hard. We recognise that, but we also recognise that there are already some good examples of where circularity is actually already being adopted or already being recognised. And part of what we found in this research is that, and I'll come to this in a second, but language is important, and I'll circle back to that in a sec. And some of the tools that were listed in that summary that Darren presented as well, the tool scan has been very much a global scan, but we're also looking for Australian examples. So if there are things that you are using, websites, links, particular dashboards or anything of this nature from your sector, please do share them with us, because we are building, what we hope will be as extensive as we can do in terms of providing, these assets to share with others. So please feel free to send those through. And also just to say that the work that's being done against those categories, which we're going to use as we go through the next session, the next bit of this meeting today, they're there to guide us. So if we come up with other tools that might be, not necessarily fitting into any particular category, this is about creating an Australian taxonomy, if you will, probably too strong a word, but an Australian categorization of what kinds of tools we think apply here. So there are, we're very much open to hearing in terms of what the recommendations are for that. So yeah, just a few quick points. But so far to date, we've actually done 50 interviews across the 4 sectors. So just reiterating that the research does cover industry, built environment, food and ag, and resources. And we do have a survey in market as well, which has had about 20 completed responses. So we're also looking for more responses to that if you're interested in participating, and Darren will have a link on that later. And it's been a fascinating, couple of months of having those interviews. Some really high level points that we've been finding these, and really it comes down to, and I don't think it's going to be rocket science to anyone on this call, but that circular economy, like anything, really gains traction when we are looking at what is the outcome. Is this going to be delivering value for my business? Is it going to be delivering a cost reduction? Will it provide a new market opportunity for me? The conversation starts to change when there obviously is some kind of a financial or some kind of economic benefit to the organisation. But the other thing that we've been finding is that, sorry, Darren, if you just pop back, is that the concept of circular economy, mention that and often people glaze over. And so what we actually need to look at is what's the language? How are we describing circular economy? Are we looking at talking more about resource efficiency? Are we looking at really getting into what's called the R ladder of, repair, reuse, refurbish, remanufacture, looking at those types of practical applied examples of how to implement circular economy, implement the circular strategies as we transition. So there are a couple of really high level points that keep coming up in the research to date. So maybe you've got some thoughts on that as we go through. Thanks, Darren. Some of the business models that have been in play, to give you some examples. So Darren mentioned the 3 principles, which many of you will be familiar with. Food and ag, we've got a few there. And I'm just going to zero in on the next one, which I think is built environment. So here we've got things that, again, many of you will be familiar with. Design for disassembly. We had that great guidance document that came out with Corio and Built, maybe it was last year or the year before. Buildings as material banks, Kennett Builders, and the work that Anthony Carbone is doing in Adelaide on that for an Australian example. Modular housing, I spoke to some great, you might be familiar with Formflow out of Geelong. They're doing a great project in the Colac-Otway region along the Great Ocean Road there on modular housing and low carbon concrete. These are all design decisions that happen at that very front of the chain, very front of the planning of projects that can really change the outcome of what's available in that next principle, which is keeping materials and products in circulation. And we've got some great examples there. We've got Forever Fit Outs, the work that Dexus is doing on Forever Fit Outs. We've got recycled content, which is probably the one that most organisations are familiar with, particularly in infrastructure. And then, of course, we've got the retention of infrastructure, keeping those builds in situ and adapting those with a adaptive reuse plan. And when we talk about regenerate natural systems in this sector, we're probably more connecting with, I guess, timber reuse or mass timber construction in terms of, keeping those embodied carbon impacts limited. So just a few examples there from the built environment. I think we flick through to the other 2 priority sectors in industry and resources to give you some ideas there of what we're looking at. But these sectors were selected because they are priority sectors in the framework, if you're wondering how we landed on them. Thanks, Darren. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, that's fine. So we'll get to the question of what kind of tools do businesses need? As was mentioned in the list that Darren showed, the research is suggesting to us that these categories might be what we can sort of consider as at different points in a business and different points in a project. We've got different needs. And so the question that we'll be sort of asking you to consider as we move through is, are these kinds of categories right for you? If you think about how you do business, and if you're thinking about transitioning to perhaps more circular strategies around reuse, around making a bigger influence on repair, these kinds of tools are, they fall into different categories, but are they the right ones? So think of that as we go through now. So I want to start by just giving you a little bit of a heads up on how we're going to do this next few minutes, probably the next 15 minutes or so. We're going to use the Teams chat. So as we go through each example of a particular tool, I'm going to write in the chat what that tool is. And then when you see the tool name pop up in the chat, we're going to use the emoticons to indicate whether it's something that you currently use. So yes is a thumbs up, no is a laugh, and maybe is a surprise. So those 3 little emoticons should come up if you right click on that word in the chat. We'll do a test run on the first one when we get to it shortly. So, and those instructions will pop up again as we go through too. So if we look at the first category, strategy and decision tools. So this is really at the sort of beginning of a project or some kind of program. Here we're talking about things like cost benefit analysis, return on investment modeling, scenario planning, business model canvases, a circular business model canvas perhaps that could be used, an opportunity assessment, and just that pre-feasibility frameworks. Are these the kinds of tools that you currently use? Are they needed? From participants, we've heard some examples of again, it sort of comes back to this cost issue. Tools must support decision-making and economic viability. This cost is really consistent throughout all of the participants that we've had so far. And again, it also recognises that these tools are used at different times depending on how mature the business is as a business, but also how mature they are in their understanding of what does it mean to contribute to a circular economy. So if we look at 3 of the examples that are listed that are falling into this category, the first one might be a cost-benefit analysis. And so, an example of that might be, and again, probably you're all familiar with this kind of, Excel spreadsheet, but is this something that you would use currently? A cost-benefit analysis, and with a circularity lens in mind. If we're looking at how do we do this project, and instead of having a capital expense, we've got an operational expense to perhaps hire some part of the build, to do a rental program or some kind of leasing. Or are we going to be looking at a cost benefit of doing an adaptive reuse versus a knockdown and start new? So is this a tool that you would use? Or perhaps it could be a business model canvas. And this is one that's taken from the Circulab folks out of France, but we do have other examples that we're looking to build. So this is a traditional business model canvas, but there are some different questions that would be asked if you're looking at circularity to overlay on a business model canvas. Is this something that you use, business model canvas? Or perhaps it could be a value chain map where you're looking at a particular element of your work or of your project that looks at where does the material start from, what's the raw material extraction, all the way through to end of life. And you look at all of the actors that are involved in that, what kinds of value loss is happening at different points in the chain, and then where do the opportunities overlay on that. And this is an example that we took from our Circo training that we launched when I was at Planet Arc with Sustainability Victoria. It's a really great whole of system approach to, considering what are the impacts of a particular product or project. So if we think about those 3, I'm just going to put these in the chat here. And if you've got some thoughts, oh, thanks, Anne, you've got a question there, thought about adding bamboo. Yes, very much. We can add that in. Thank you for that reminder. So if we think about these first 3, hopefully this works for us. So if you consider a cost-benefit analysis, are you using that currently? If you could right-click on the word in the chat and then just indicate your yes, no, maybe with the various emoticons. And if you're using perhaps a business model canvas or a value chain map, if you've used one of those. And then as we're going through there, if anyone wants to, if you've indicated your engagement with those particular tools, if anyone, Darren, if you wanted to sort of pose some other questions around that.
Yeah, sure. So I guess we're keen to hear from all of you now. We'll pause here while you're adding your thoughts to those 3 with the emoticons. But we want to hear from you. Do you need these tools currently? And then if you don't need them now, do you think they could be needed or useful in the future, perhaps? So we're really seeking your feedback here.
Or perhaps there are other strategy-related decision-making things. Yeah.
So feel free just to unmute and just jump in.
This is great. Thanks everyone for, this is working. Yeah, I like it when it works, the technology. This is great. Thanks everyone.
I'll just jump in to encourage conversation. I mean, I
Thank
suppose
you.
from Brickworks, Austral Bricks point of view, we obviously use a lot of materials already, and a lot of slag, fly ash, and are continually looking for different sources. But we're quite a large business, and I mean, what you're describing there is sort of what we do through normal business operations. So
right.
I think you mentioned before you were focusing on SMEs, so we would probably already have our own processes to do that. So just jumping in to start the conversation, that's all.
Thanks, Emily.
And I suppose I just because there's a conversation around bamboo or wood and sort of that sort of stuff, I just want to say that we recently had a material circularity index for our brick products at 66%. And I don't know if that plays in those sorts of EPD based measurements as well, into differentiating different products as well.
Yeah, that's great. And thanks, Emily. That's a really great feedback. Thank you. And I guess the question then is, what sorts of, in your supply chain, are there any examples that you've, with regards to making decisions, are there any particular elements in your business, noting that it's business as usual for you, but are there any particular tools that you find that are quite helpful in determining decisions for your business?
Yeah, look, I mean, as I mentioned, I'm just speaking from myself to start conversation.
Yeah,
I'm
thank you.
not trying to influence others, but I mean, we have our existing processes, approval processes, business cases, etc.
Yeah,
I mean, for
okay.
us, it's often about limited of availability of area on a site to store different amounts of material, like silo capacity, etc. Come down to that. So I know I'm jumping around here, but like if there were grants around to expand the physical capacity to have different raw materials come onto the site, that would be something that we'd be really interested in.
Right.
Anne, I can see you got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just thinking with a strategy tool, organisations I've worked in would be notoriously suspicious of any generalised cost-benefit analysis tool or program. We'd always have to make it very specific to our unique circumstances. And so while a tool that was like a central tool might be a good heads up as a think about it this way, I think, yeah, I can't see me actually using a generalized tool. So something, say, suggested, oh, you know, this is the payback period, or when you do this, you save this much amount, or you invest this up front and then you can expect that down the back, etc. I reckon I would have to persuade corporate leadership teams that those figures were appropriate in the specific context of that organisation.
That's really great feedback. Thanks, Anne. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Oh,
Maybe we'll move on to the next set of tools. Nicole, how does that sound?
yes, sure. Just noting, we've got a couple of extras, and I saw you pop up there, CJ and Rocio. If you want to put your thoughts in the chat, and then I'll record that there, and then we'll come back in the next bit. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess real quick, mine was in response to Anne's.
Oh, thanks,
like,
CJ.
I'm wondering if there's a capability to not have this as like a black box where the assumptions are established and you're unable to modify those. Like if the companies could input their own cost metrics that they're experiencing, allow it to run through the CBA analysis, then that would actually make it much more usable. I totally agree with you. If you just have these static assumptions that can't be modified, you're going to run into problems when actually using it.
Thanks, CJ. Good feedback. Thanks.
So, Nicole, how about we get into measurement and assessment?
Yes, yeah.
As the next, yeah.
Yeah, so measurement and assessment. So we're looking here at things like material flow analysis, LCAs, you know, sort of having a baseline. We're looking at, you know, what sort of KPIs are being set. The MCI, which you mentioned, Emily, these kinds of very, very number-driven measurement tools. You know, what are we sort of looking at there? What are we using? Again, what could we be using? And some of the feedback that we've been receiving there is sort of in line with what, well, sort of counters, I guess, what you were saying, CJ, around the need for businesses to be able to input their own. There's also a call for sort of being able to standardize in some way. So I guess there's that balance between what can be standardized, and I'm thinking here of some of the work that the Transport for New South Wales have done in their sustainable procurement work in the last sort of couple of years. There's an element there of sort of standardization But perhaps, you know, how do we balance that with the need for businesses to actually use it for their own experience? So, yeah, so some examples there. You know, again, some of you might be familiar with these: material flow analysis, which is what the National Circular Economy Framework has an element of a Sankey diagram in some of the research that CSIRO completed to achieve or establish that 4.6% circularity. Is this something that businesses are using currently, or would you like to be using it more? And then we've also got, you know, looking at KPIs, I think is the next one. If we look at what kinds of KPIs are you setting, you know, we've got some examples here that might capture some, you know, circular design elements into the design of projects and business as usual, if you will. So again, if we look at a couple of examples, but that's a very limited set. If you can indicate on those, you know, are you using either of those, both of those currently? Are there other measurement tools that you engage with? And I don't know, Rocio, if you wanted to jump in while we're doing this bit, if this is relevant here, or we can skip back to the previous one as well.
Thank you, Nicole. Great to see you.
Good to see you.
It was an example, though, so
Okay.
you let me know whether if it's relevant. I was doing work with a port authority, and they were trying to adopt sustainable procurement, and two things came to mind. First, they had this massive question of, if we ask sort of circular type services or products, where is the market? Like, who are the suppliers that we currently engage with? Can they provide these type of products or services?
Mm-hmm.
And if not, who are the suppliers that we need to engage? So a tool that allows to understand sort of that marketplace or supplier base for companies that want to integrate circularity services and products.
Yeah.
That was one. And the other one also within the construction sort of industry, there is a decision making between demolition or deconstruction for certain projects. And that is substantial in terms of services, material, and additional work. And the initial engineering investigations from a structural perspective in terms of how to deconstruct and what to save and what not to save. So whether if there is a pre-existing standard approach that can sort of de-risk that decision and therefore be adopted by more sort of asset owners than currently do, that will be another way how to facilitate sort of that type of adoption.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Rocio. Excellent.
CJ, you got your hand up.
Yeah. So I don't know if this is going to come in another a further down tool grouping, but for material flows analysis, we're looking at steel reuse. And this is really something that's been taken up in the UK. So we've been meeting with a lot of UK leaders in that space. Something that's important is about not only the material flow analysis, but the amount of economically extractable material within a building. So like, for instance, steel, you may have a steel building, but a lot of it's not economically viable to pull out. Maybe like 70% of it is. And so having a tool where you're able to map out the economically viable extractable material for circular reuse is an area that I feel like in Australia is really missing, and like a key link to be able to. It then leads into the economic analysis of making circularity feasible, because in the UK they've been able to do these analyses and say, okay, it actually makes us money if we pull out the most effective things that have the highest value in circularity.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting, isn't it? Because it still comes back to that cost element. It's about circularity, but and again, it's sort of that feeds into some of the the streams of thought that we've been hearing from people is that as long as we'll do it, as long as there's an opportunity for economic benefit, which, we're in business, so, understandable. But yeah, thanks, CJ. That's a great suggestion. And I guess they're over time anyway, material banks and BIM modeling can probably help with that. But for the right now and what's already in place, that's the question of, how do we analyze that in a way that's useful? Yeah, thank you. That's great.
Yeah, if you're interested, I'd be happy to connect you with a company that's like leading
Okay.
this space over in the UK, and they could probably show you what they're working with because it's quite sophisticated and
Okay.
really fascinating.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, CJ.
Any other comments or feedback on your use or otherwise of material flow analysis, KPIs? Do you need them currently? Might you need them in the future?
I think we can move on
Perhaps
to
we
the
should
next
move
one.
on then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Darren. So this comes into, the day-to-day, the implementation, the operation of stuff. And I think, and one of the things that you were talking about there is convincing your senior leadership team that perhaps a, cost-benefit analysis tool is useful or applies to your organisation. One of the participants suggested maybe there's a playbook or some kind of a guide for being able to explain what circular economy is to executive leadership teams, because sometimes they might not be as close to the mark of what others are in the space. But some kind of a playbook, a guide, checklist, standard operating procedures, these kinds of practices, again, would probably be business as usual for many of you. You mentioned, Rocio, some kind of listing of suppliers. Is this, something that you either currently use or that could be useful if you're trying to frame a circular lens over projects? We've got some examples here. I think we've got, like a how-to guide. This one's from CradleNet in Sweden. To give you some examples there of a step-by-step of how to take circular action and particularly around an emissions focus and nature on this particular example. And then I think we've also got a procurement template, and many of you might be familiar with this page if you've read the GBCA circular procurement guideline that was released. I think that was last year, from memory. And so having these kinds of templated clauses that can go into your procurement, whether working for government or working in large organisations, are these kinds of things that you currently use or that could help you in the future. So if we think about how-to guides, and then we've also got procurement templates. Again, we'll invite you to utilise the chat on those, but hearing other thoughts as well. So this is around implementation and operational type tools that you might have used or would like to have access to.
And again, keen to hear from you. So either raise your hand or just unmute and jump in if you've got anything further to add. Do you need these tools? If you don't need them now, do you think you might need them in the future? Are there anything missing from this category?
I think the procurement guidelines and sharing that, like how Green Star have, really helps the supply chain plan for it as well. I'm just to say, so you might not even have the questions coming from projects yet, but you can know that that's the framing of how those questions might come.
Yep, that's great. Thanks, Emily.
What you said, but it's not written there, the how-to guide, if it was a what is it deck,
Yes.
very helpful.
Yeah.
The what is it deck, very helpful. People, and what is it practically? Like, what does it actually mean practically?
Yep. That reinforces that thinking too, Anne. Thank you. Yeah, it's really a I was talking to somebody at an event with Timber Queensland a few weeks ago, and this person was talking about great modular use of mass timber and etc. And I went up and I introduced myself and I said, I'm doing circular economy research, and you could literally see the glaze over his eyes. And I just thought, okay, what you talked about is exactly circular, but you're just not calling it that and you're not connecting with that. So it very much is around that sort of how do you translate it.
That what it is at different stages. So,
Aha,
you know,
yes.
we've been working with a client, talking them through what does this mean? Okay, the first time you design something, and then when you're managing the asset, and then when there's churn, and you know, like that, through all of those phases, if there was, you know, something that had consolidated that thinking, I would have definitely used it. So I made it up myself.
Yeah. Thanks, Anne. That's great.
And CJ's added an idea to the chat here. I don't know, CJ, if you want to speak to that about a tool to identify differences and risks if designing with a circular material compared to business as usual.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, CJ.
Yeah, just as a designer, you know, a lot of times our engineers are really time poor. And so it's changing to these new materials. Like for instance, looking at recycled aggregate for road base, it has issues with drainage if you don't get very particular aggregate size dispersal among the road base. And so there's these like unique engineering challenges which like scare a lot of designers away from it. And so having like a really easy way of identifying those risks and allowing engineers to then identify and engineer those risks out is super critical.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That's great. And it's great to hear from your design perspective as well, CJ. Thank you.
And thanks, Rick, for sharing details of that module.
Yeah, that was a great module that's available in circular economy. Thanks, Rick. Okay.
So maybe now we'll move on.
Yeah, conscious of time, as we often do. We'll see if we can get through maybe another one or two, and then open it up to, you know, any other final thoughts. But monitoring and reporting. So we're kind of bunched in together here, things like dashboards. This is where digital product passports fit, I think. Sorry, Darren, just pop back for that one. Asset tracking systems. So again, this is sort of business as usual, I think, for this particular sector. Keeping track of inventory. Are these tools that you might already be using? Are you looking at or investigating digital product passports, for example? But yeah, if we look at the two that are sort of most common so far in the research that we've done, dashboards is the first one. An example here, again, this one I think is from Europe, but there are many versions of these kinds of things. And I think we've also got, just a visual there of digital product passports. It's coming out, you know, digital product passports are really being discussed a lot in Europe in the built environment sector, as many of you are familiar. But is this something that you're exploring or currently using, maybe not calling it that, either of those two, or other monitoring and monitoring tools?
Are you going to put up the audit one as well, or no? Had you?
Oh, we can do that.
The inventory.
Yeah.
Because it's not correct that everybody's using it.
Okay.
There's inventory that's recorded for certain things, but when you get to being seriously circular in a full fit out, very few people have audited, you know, their light fittings or the this or that they could potentially reuse, or the duct or the duct work or the.
Yep. Just put that in there as well. Thank you, Anne. Don't mind.
Also hop in a comment on the digital passports. Not all passports are created the same. And so the EU requirements currently don't require performance data in their documentation, which makes it really challenging, almost useless for us to use as structural engineers. And like, we need to know how the steel, what the steel is designed to, for us to be able to actually effectively reuse it. And so yeah, like just be wary. Like, yes, digital product passports are key, but there's also devil nuance on what's captured within that and how that's able to feed in and be used by design.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, CJ. We might, and thanks, Rick, for that link there as well. I've saved that. Oh, you can't. Oh, interesting. Okay, I wonder if it's because I copied it. Let's just type it again here. Asset tracking systems, inventory systems. Yeah, okay. We're going to keep these in here. If there's other thoughts, you can always go back and add to them. We might try for one more, Darren, and see how we go. Capability building and management engagement, sorry. It's kind of bundling all in together, things like training, workshops, but we've also got in here case studies. We've also had people talk about, where does marketing fit? Does marketing fit in this piece as well, or is there another sort of market development category that we should be looking at? We've also added human support in here. So a lot of people have been saying, you know, look, this is all great, but unless there's a human there that's actually going to walk me through, you know, we're not going to be in a situation that we can adopt. And so some findings from the participants there, you know, talking about education tools, that's great, but learning by doing is actually better than walking through a module online, different experiences for different people. And we've got some thoughts here again on 3 examples. I think we had a learning dashboard. So those of you in Queensland, if you're not already familiar, the EcoBiz platform from Business Chamber Queensland, they've got a new learning and activity and sort of tracking dashboard on circular economy, which this screenshot comes from. So they've got a number of different learning modules on circular economy within this particular one. So is that something that you're currently using, this or some other learning dashboard? And then we've also got case studies. Everyone loves a good case study, but is that something that informs your practice towards circular economy? Could we do others that sort of spell it out? And considering what you were mentioning earlier, Anne, about, you know, sort of having some more detail on some of those elements, or perhaps it could be a third example of just the humans. You know, do we need humans in the room? Is that your experience, or are these more learning dashboards, etc., acceptable to you? I'll just get my words for that. So give me a second, but jump in if you've got thoughts in the meantime. Learning dashboards, case studies, and human support.
Yeah, I'll hop in with another comment, not to hog all the time.
Yeah, go for it.
But I believe personally that the current way that case studies are structured aren't very effective, and they could be much more effective. In most case studies currently, they don't capture critical things that we need for designing, like what version of the code were you designing to? What standards were you using when you were doing this design? What's your compliance pathways? Like, these are all like super critical things to consider, and for people to determine whether that case study is actually can be applied to theirs, and like what type of building or infrastructure typology. You know, all these things are usually missing from case studies, which I find boggles me. But I think case studies can be very much more powerful, but more than they're currently used in practice and how they're structured.
Yeah, great. Thanks, CJ. Thank you. Conscious of time, Darren, do you want to just flick through to sort of where we're at the end? I'm not sure. Yeah, just to give you a bit of a heads up so that we can hand back to Hudson for the last couple of minutes. Over to you, Darren.
Thank you so much, everyone. That was a great interactive session. We try to make it a bit entertaining and enjoyable. We've got some really interesting ideas that serve us there. We'll follow up in the chat as well from the recording. In terms of what's next over the next 4 or 5 months or so, we're going to continue facilitating a mix of case studies and targeted interviews, continue to participate in vendor networks such as this to validate our insights around the tools and frameworks, and then stay in touch because we're keen to understand, your thoughts on the toolkit, the online resource that we're developing later this year. And we're going to be inviting co-design participation to help us fine-tune that resource to make sure it's aligned with your needs and interests as well across the 4 priority sectors. And just an invitation as well to complete the survey if you haven't already done so. We're definitely looking for more participation there. So please scan that QR code and get involved, and just stay in contact with us. Please feel free to reach out to me, and I can put you in touch with Nicole as well if you're not already in contact with Nicole. And we're keen to stay connected if you want to participate further in our research. So I'll hand back now. Any further closing thoughts, Nicole, that you wanted to share?
Just to say thank you to the MECLA team for allowing us to be part of today's show and tell, and thanks everyone for your contributions. And do reach out if you've got some extra thoughts that would help inform what we're doing. So thanks very much, and back to you, Hudson.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Darren. Look, we have mentioned circularity as the kind of the destination, with embodied carbon as one of the missing pieces to get us there. So totally aligned, I think, in terms of where we need to take the economy. Thank you very much to our members who've joined today and contributed. I think that, so this is being recorded. We'll have it. We'll have slides and we'll have the video in our resources section on our website. We are coming to the end of the hour. And really, Darren, while we're saying goodbye, could you put the QR code up again? I think that just give people another moment to do that. Really encourage our members, and if in your network you have others who you think should have a look at this, please send them the link. I'd really love to see as many of the thoughtful MECLA doers contribute this as possible. And your contact details, the Secretariat will have those. We'll have them in the slides. If people want to follow up, that would be fantastic. But stay friends with MECLA. We'd love to hear how it goes. And when you are published, Darren, I know that's a big step for the academic side of things, but this is the research that sits across from business and research. We'd love to share the link, whether that's through our socials and maybe in our newsletter as well, so that people can read, what your findings are in that condensed form. For your time today, for putting this together, thank you very much, Nicole and Darren. Thank you to Monash, and behind the scenes to Kati for bringing this all together. Thank you, MECLA. Keep an eye on the socials, the newsletter, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks very much, everybody.